Welcome, Bronco Nation, to my review of Boise State's win over Utep. Boise State, of course, winning in this one 54-13, a huge bounce-back win after losing, of course, on the road to UCF last week. Boise State came into this one motivated. They came in angry. They looked angry how they were playing, so very, very aggressive on the defensive end, even though that didn't necessarily translate into the consistency overall that Boise State fans might have been looking at. It did translate into huge plays, multiple interceptions, 3 forced fumbles. Boise State had 3 turnovers all of last season. All of 2020, they had 3 interceptions, no forced fumbles. That is it. Boise State had twice as many turnovers in one game, this game, than they did against last season, all of last season. It was an incredible game. Boise State, very, very motivated in this one. A lot of talk going around. A lot of people kind of underestimating the Broncos in this one. Most people were expecting a win, but a lot of people were thinking it was going to be a lot closer than it was. I thought it was going to be a good win, but I was actually predicting a score of 42-17 in this one, and Boise State had that at the half. At the half, it was 41-13 in Boise State's favor, and of course ended up being able to put on another 12 points at the end there, 54-13. So an outstanding game by Boise State. We're going to go through my 3 keys to the game. We'll save that to the end, though. We're going to go through the offense, the defense, special teams, review the performance by Boise State, assign a grade to each unit, look at the great plays that Boise State had in both those areas, look at some of the I wouldn't necessarily call them areas of concerns, but areas of improvement going into next week's big matchup against Oklahoma State. Then we'll look at my 3 keys to the game and see how Boise State did against those. And then that'll be it. That's the wrap. And it's already 1 a.m. my time. I'm sure that it will be much, much later on by the time this video actually uploads. It takes forever to get them uploaded to YouTube. But it's already 1 a.m. my time, so I'm going to try and not take too long. You've heard that before, so buckle up. But I wrote a lot of stuff down from this game. It was like watching 2 or 3 college football games in one game. I don't know if any of you got that impression, but there was so much going on. So many big plays left and right. Boise State had 13 drives on offense, which was incredible. The defense, it looked like, every play looked like a different defense was out there on the field. You'd see Boise State would give up a big play, and then they go out and get a pick. And then they'd let UTEP go in and drive on them for a little bit, and then they get a big hit in the backfield, and it was just back and forth almost the whole game, at least until things slowed down there in the second half. So a lot to review. Let's get started. We're already at 2 minutes here, so let's get started right off the bat here. So going into the offense right off the bat here, Boise State's offense looked much better in this game. I talked about last week how Boise State needed to find their identity, or it looked like they were struggling to find an identity last week. And Boise State definitely found one. I talked in my last video about how Boise State needed to commit to something. If they wanted to be the balanced run, pass, 50-50 kind of deal that Boise State has been in the past, very balanced attack, they needed to commit to that. If they wanted to be the Tim Plow style air raid offense that mixes in the run game to complement the pass, but leans on pretty heavily on the pass, they needed to push hard into that. And boy, did Boise State do that in this one. Bachmeier threw for over 300 yards for the first time. This is an incredible stat considering how prolific Bachmeier has been. He threw for the first time for over 300 yards since his first game against Florida State. In that game, he threw for over 400 yards. But since then, even though he's won a lot of games, he hasn't thrown for over 300 yards. And he threw for over 340 yards in this one. The offense looked very, very good. There were a couple things that need to be worked on, but overall, this offense looked much smoother, looked much cleaner, and it wasn't just that they were going up against a weaker defense, okay? That, of course, is going to factor into how the offense performs, but the play calling, which was a huge issue last week in that loss, especially in the third quarter, the play calling was great, I thought. I'm not going to necessarily say magnificent, because there were a couple of head scratchers there in the second half, specifically keeping in the starters as late as it was, but it was really, really good play calling throughout the game. Boise State used the pass to set up the run, even though in the up until the fourth quarter they only had 50 yards rushing. The runs that they got were good runs. Van Buren got 2 rushing touchdowns. Halani had a rushing touchdown. Cyrus had a nice run. We ended up getting flipped in the air. Actually did a full front flip after getting tackled. But the runs that Boise State had in the first half, even though they were few and far between, they were quality runs, and then Boise State used that expectation of the run to set up the passing game. Boise State had 2 different touchdowns that they pulled the ball out of the belly of the running back and then threw it deep. One of those was a pass to C.T. Cobbs, which was a 60-plus yard touchdown. I think it was a 61-yard touchdown there by Cobbs. And then the other one was on a faked the jet sweep and then pulled it off and threw it to tight end Hopper for only his 4th career catch. He's played 2 years for Boise State so far, but this was only his 4th career catch. So 23-yard touchdown to him, and both of those came from the running game. So even though the running game didn't have a visible impact so much as far as the stats go, as far as what you saw the backs taking carries, the running game had a much bigger impact beyond that in how it impacted the Utep defense and allowed Boise State to actually implement the offense that Tim Plow has wanted to do at this university. So I was very, very impressed by the offense. Threw it all over the field again. Didn't spread the wealth as much as they did last game. Bowens didn't have a catch. Riley Smith was not targeted as many times. Number 87, Rafdell, he was targeted once but didn't end up making that catch. Bachmeier threw it too far. That was a trend for Bachmeier today. Let me finish my thought real quick. So anyway, Boise State threw to their main receivers. Shakir, Cobbs, and Evans, out of the 340 passing yards that Bachmeier had, they had 278 of those yards. So the passes were heavily concentrated in the 3 main guys, but they played outstanding, especially Shakir. 2 one-handed catches on bad throws by Bachmeier, which then leads me into the point I was trying to make before. That was a trend by Bachmeier. Even though he had a good statistical game passing, I don't think it was his best game passing. He was taking hits. He was hanging in there, tough as nails as always. But especially on the deep balls, he looked inaccurate. And we saw that last season too. When Boise State, the few times that they did take deep shots, they didn't take many, but the few times they did take deep shots last season, Bachmeier did not look comfortable or at least accurate on those throws. And we saw that today. He should have really, Boise State had, and I was going to address this later during my keys to the game, but I'll just talk about it right now. Boise State had 6 completions of over 20 yards. So that's a big stat considering that last week they only had 1 completion of over 20 yards, and most of that was on the ground. So Boise State had 6 completions over 20 yards, but really if it wasn't for the athletic ability of Shakir, it should really have only been 4 completions. And if Bachmeier had been more accurate, it would have been at least 7 completions because he had a wide open Octavius Evans who tried to do his best Shakir impression, tried to go up and get the one-handed catch, and ended up missing it there. So, and then he also had Helani on a wheel route open for a 20-plus yard catch if he'd been able to get him there, but he threw it. Helani was wide open, but Bachmeier threw it into the sidelines. So Bachmeier, and we saw that in the UCF game as well. Bachmeier was able to complete anytime he wanted a receiver that got the receivers pretty much open. Boise State really should have leaned more heavily into the passing game, especially in the second half. But he missed several receivers, at least 5 or 6 guys that he missed last game, and we saw that push into this game. So, next week against Oklahoma State, their defenders are much better. Those boxes are going to be much smaller. Those holes that Bachmeier is trying to fit the pass into are going to be much, much tighter. And if he doesn't clean up his accuracy, it's going to be another tough game. Even though it's Boise State on the blue, home field advantage, it's going to be another tough game if Bachmeier cannot get those passes on target to his receivers at a more consistent clip. And I think that he's going to be better next week. I think that he's going to build off of this momentum. I think he feels good about this game, and he should. Like I said, 340 yards, no interceptions, 2 touchdowns. Great game by him. I think he's going to build off of that momentum. He plays great in front of this crowd. Thank you, Bronco Nation, for showing up. You guys were loud. 3 false start penalties. I think it was 3 in a row, 2 in a row on one drive and 3 overall against UTEP. So that's you, Bronco Nation. Anytime a false start, you can count that as the 12th man in the stands making up for that. So Boise State, great sound, great motivation, energizing this team onto victory. So great job there, Bronco Nation. So I think that Bachmeier is going to be better next week, but he really, really does have to be better if Boise State wants to go get this win, because Shakir is magic. He is 7 receptions for 166 yards, no touchdowns, which is a little bit surprising, but he was breaking tackles as always, and going up and making some highlight reel receptions. I mean, the 2 one-handed catches and then a deep ball through pass interference that he still managed to go up and get. That I just don't know. It was a Titus Young type of play. It was reminiscent of the Kellen Moore era, when you had the Titus Young and the Austin Pettis receiving greats out there. That's what Shakir looked like. Shakir is definitely a Sunday afternoon player. He is an outstanding wide receiver. He's going to be our offensive player of the game. I'm not gonna leave that as a surprise to the end, because I think it's pretty obvious. He played incredibly, but Shakir's not going to be able to rescue Bachmeier every single time. And like I said, against those Oklahoma State defenders, he's not necessarily going to win every one-on-one jump ball matchup. So he's a great route runner. He gets open. Bachmeier's got to be able to hit him, especially if going deep, because Boise State's not going to get too many opportunities against this stout Oklahoma State defense. And if the receiver's open deep, Bachmeier needs to make sure that he's hitting him on the money. No, don't leave it up to chance on this one. So, but other than that, the offense overall, I thought came together much better. I think we're finding out what this Boise State offense is. And now, after everything was said and done, I think they had 121 yards rushing. But, like I said, prior to the fourth quarter, it was 50 yards rushing. So that was just because in the fourth quarter, they just went to run the ball, run the clock out, win the game. So 50 yards rushing, but the runs that they had were effective. I don't have a problem with that. Boise State doesn't need to have a 1,000-yard rusher every year as long as they're winning games. As long as this is working for Boise State, that's fine. Like I said in my last video, Boise State needs to do something differently to put themselves back on top, put themselves back on the map when it comes to not just the group of 5, but being a team that people think of as a Power 5, and when conference expansion starts happening again, starts thinking of them as a team that they need to be putting into their conference, which we of course saw Boise State missing out on this last expansion round with the Big 12. And I think that this offensive style can get Boise State there. If the team can fully commit, if Bachmeier or Sears or whatever quarterback down the road can commit to this and get more accurate in that passing game, especially when the long passing game develops. Because the more long passes that Boise State had, the more intermediate and short throws they had available, and the better the run game worked, and the better the fakes from the run game worked to increase the pass. So Boise State needs to be able to stretch this field, and it's going to take an accurate quarterback, which Bachmeier has those skills to get there, but he's going to have to really focus on it and tune it up going into this Oklahoma State game. So that was the first half. Great job the first half. Second half, Boise State has struggled. They've struggled in the second half. And it wasn't just last week, which was terrible play calling, which really did it. But it wasn't just last week. Boise State for a long time has struggled, especially under Brian Harsin, has struggled in the first half. Been electric in the first, puts up tons of points, and then comes out in the second half and just goes completely blank. Either kind of tries to run the clock out for 2 quarters, which doesn't work, or just you loses all of the intensity, not just the intensity, but also the play calling. The mixing it up, the throwing it all around the field, the keeping them on their feet. It becomes very, very predictable play calling in the second half. And I think this coaching staff wanted to overcome that. So even though Boise State was up 41-13 at the end of the first half, the starters came out and played for the entire third quarter. It wasn't until the fourth quarter, really, that Boise State's second-string guys started being able to get on the field. So Boise State, Andy Avalos realized this was an issue, and I normally would not have condoned keeping your starters out when you have a massive game against Oklahoma State next week. I would normally not have condoned keeping your starters out on the field with such a huge lead, at least not for the entire third quarter, but this time it made sense. Boise State needed to find a way to get out of that sluggishness, to get out of this rut that they've been in the second half, and to prove that they can go out and score just as explosively. Boise State moved the ball well in the second half. It didn't translate into as many points, a lot more field goals in the second half, but they proved that they could go out there and play with intensity. Tim Plow said in his interviews when he was joining Boise State that he doesn't look at the scoreboard until it's half 100, and he didn't. He didn't rest the starters until we had 50 points on the scoreboard. So good on him and keeping keeping with his word there. And I love that we have an offensive coordinator that pushes that. I do think that he pushed it a little too far. The first drive, yes, keep the starters on there, do it. Second drive, okay. The third drive was questionable to me. Okay, you've got Holani, who's already, they said, on a limited snap count, already playing a little gingerly, though he looked good. He looked really good out there, but they said he's your number one running back, and you need him for next week. He's still out there. Bachmeier is still out there. They had designed quarterback runs by Bachmeier, taking hits on the late in the third quarter when you were already up. I think at that point they were actually up 51 to. I think they were actually up at that point 48-13, maybe, or 51-13 at that point. And they have their star quarterback taking a designed quarterback run up the middle on a meaningless third down to try and get that first down when you already have the lead. So that, you're at that point, you're talking high risk, high reward, or sorry, not high risk, high reward. You're talking high risk, low reward. So the reward side is that this team develops some consistency, continues to work on the schemes and the formats that they wanted to use against Oklahoma State, and also develops some momentum going into that game and the knowledge that they can still perform in the second half. That's all well and good, but you also have to weigh it against losing your key starters, which we saw in defense. We'll talk about that when we get to the defensive section. But you also have to weigh it against losing your key starters, which if you don't have them on the field, if Holani is out, Boise State has no running game. Cyrus had a nice run. Van Buren was able to push it in for a couple of runs. But the running game under Boise State really was only effective today because of Holani, or the threat of Holani being out there. The one long running touchdown that Boise State had with Holani, he looked awesome, broke a tackle, got into the end zone. That's the difference you have when you have Holani in the game. That just Van Buren, he's a big ball of muscle. He can push in the end zone. Most times, though, Boise State did come up short. I'll talk about that when I get to the negatives here. But he can push in the end zone most times, and Cyrus looks pretty good, but he doesn't look Holani level. And to keep your star running back out there when he's already having issues getting hit like that, it's very questionable. Boise State was very, very lucky in this one not to lose any offensive players. Even Cobbs did go down with a twisted ankle. Hopefully he's okay. But Boise State was very, very lucky in this one not to lose any key players going into next week. So if Boise State's ever in a similar situation where they already have the lead way up, they've already given their offense a couple of drives to develop some momentum in the second half, they need to start knowing when the time to pull the starts. And I think part of that, like I said, is this coaching staff wanting to overcome some things, and part of it is also having a young, inexperienced coaching staff, at least inexperienced in the current positions that they're in at this level. So just trying to figure out what they need to do with this fresh team that they're trying to develop into their image. So other than that, there's not really any other things to really say here. Like I said, Shakir had a great game. Bachmeier had a good game. Holani, 4 rushes for 22 yards and a touchdown. He looked really, really good when he was in his limited touches. Also, attempted to get him involved in the receiving game, just didn't get there. Cyrus looked good, showed some good skills in the passing game when they were throwing it to him in the second half. I'd like to see more of that early on. He's got some good hands. He looks a little bit like a receiver out there. I mean, just the way that the speed and agility he's showing, and the way he's running routes, he almost kind of looks a little bit like a receiver. Wearing number 4, of course, being a typical wide receiver number. He looks good. I would like to see him more in the passing game. A guy that we saw in the second half that I'd like to see in the first half a little bit is Tequeen Tyler. He shows some really nice speed. Now, yes, his stats came against Utep's second, third string guys in the fourth quarter. I understand that. But what you can't necessarily analyze the guys trying to tackle him, but you can analyze his speed out there. And he looked really, really fast. I think he'd be a good change of pace back, better as far as a speed level goes than a Van Buren. I'd like to see him out there a couple of times, see what he can do. Maybe do kind of like we did, like a Devin Demas kind of guy that can go out there. He's not going to be your every down back, but he can get out there and get some speed going and maybe get a big big play, a breakaway big play like Devin Demas used to be able to do. So let's talk about the negatives real quick on this offense before we assign them a grade. Big negative here, Evans fumbling late in the second quarter after making a great catch and trying to make some more moves. Fumbled the ball, gave Utep the ball back. I believe Boise State was able to intercept on that ensuing Utep drive. But, you can't do that against a good team like Oklahoma State. They're going to take advantage of that. Boise State's going to need a lot of breaks to win this game. They're not going to be favored in it. They're going to be major underdogs at home. A situation Boise State's not used to being at home with one of the best home field records. I think they have the best home field record since the year 2000. But the FS1 folks were showing the stats since 2010, and they're fourth right now since 2010. But this is one of the best home field advantages that any team has, and they're going to need every single ounce of that. So next week, Bronco Nation, we need every single one of you that can out on there screaming your lungs out besides when the offense is on the field, but every time Oklahoma State takes the ball, screaming your lungs out so we can get those false starts, so we can get that intimidation factor. We're going to need it. But like I said, you can't be making mistakes against a team like Oklahoma State. They're going to make you pay. You're going to only get so many chances. You're going to need a couple breaks to go your way. And if you're out there making mistakes, you're not going to be able to get what you need. Second one is can't make a 4th and goal touchdown against a Conference USA 4th and 1 touchdown run against a Conference USA defense, which is tired already that you've been beating up a lot with a lot of passes in the game. So that is concerning. Boise State still, like I said, the running game was better in this game. 30 yards better, but they looked better overall. The running game, but it was still not dominant. Boise State, if they'd wanted to, could not have turned to the running game and said, okay, take it, let's go. It showed success in the fourth quarter, but that was not the first string UTEP guys. This is not a Boise State offensive line that is able to dominate the line of scrimmage. It just isn't. They were able to give Bachmeier enough time in the pocket. They looked okay. Bachmeier took a couple of hits, but not as many as he was taking last season. So same kind of deal as against UCF. I thought the offensive line played okay as far as pass coverage goes, but when it came to running the ball, this offensive line, whether it's a limit of schemes or a limit of skill in that player position, they do not have the ability to run the ball. And that came up huge in that 4th and goal stop. Now, the more that Boise State shows their abilities to pass the ball, the more openings there'll be in the running game, like we saw today. But it's never going to be a situation at all this season. I don't see at a single point where Boise State's able to establish a dominant offensive line with the players that they have in there right now. I think it's going to take a couple of recruiting cycles to reestablish that offensive line. So that was an issue. The other one was the starters staying in the game too late and running Bachmeier on on 3rd and short. What is the point there? Just have him throw a screen pass out or hand it to the running back. If you want to get the first down, fine, but don't draw up a designed. If you want to do something situational, that's fine. If you want to keep your starters in late in the 3rd quarter when you got a huge lead, that's fine, but don't seek out contact. Don't try to get your key players hurt. That didn't make any sense to me. And the other one, this is one I haven't talked about so far, but C.T. Thomas struggled again. He struggled last week, only had 1 reception, and he dropped a huge 3rd down conversion that might have been a game changer. I believe that if he'd been able to catch that, the space that he had, he'd been able to make a few yards. Boise State would have been able to establish a little momentum. They would have been at the 35 or 30. They'd at least been able to get better field position when it came to the punting game. But, we're not going to draw on the past here. But the fact is that C.T. Thomas, who has been an incredibly reliable receiver over I think he's a 5th-year senior this year. So over his previous 4 years I think it's 4 years at Boise State, he's been an incredibly reliable receiver. He has 2 seasons with over 40 yards receiving. Last year, 20 yards receiving on a reduced schedule. But he has been an incredibly reliable receiver, someone you can always throw up and he's going to catch it. Well, he dropped a touchdown pass today that he was wide open. He caught it. But instead of securing it, he just kind of didn't play all the way through, didn't go all the way through the play, was kind of holding it loosely down here on chest level, and before securing it, and the defender was able to come and knock it out. So he, said, but instead, if he caught that and held onto it tightly all the way through, like you're supposed to when you have a defender right on you, you're not supposed to bring it down here and kind of hold it like this. If you're gonna bring it down here, you better be tucking it in. So he just kind of brought down here, just kind of holding it like this, and the defender knocked it right out of his hands, which is going to happen. But he's struggling so far. And this is a player with incredible talent, an incredible reliable target, or he has been in the past, and he has that ability to be again. But if he's not careful, he's going to get overpassed by some of these receivers. Cobbs is stepping up. Right now, really, you've got Shakir, Cobbs, and Evans as your 3 top receivers, and Bowens looks promising. There's a couple other receivers on this roster that could potentially jump over at C.T. Thomas, which is a shocker. But he needs to really step up his game, not just for the safety, for the health of the team. I think the team could really benefit from his reliable hands again, but for his own benefit, because otherwise this is a pretty deep receiving unit and he's going to end up getting jumped. So that was really a negative for there on the offense, but overall it was a good performance. I gave them an A- overall. The minus comes from the inability to run the game, but I thought that this Boise State offense got much closer to establishing an identity than we saw last week, and I'm excited about this offense. I'll give my preview of the Oklahoma State game. I'll talk about how that game's going to go, but I'm excited about the future of this Boise State team. I think it's good to have a win like this. It reestablishes some faith in the program, in the coaches, which you should never have lost. It's a rebuilding year regardless, but it establishes some faith in the fans, and I am myself having a little more confidence about this offense going forward. I'm not necessarily saying yet that we can beat Oklahoma State. Wait till my preview video and we'll see how things go. But I do definitely think that some of those games I thought we were going to drop down the road, I think I'm feeling a little more confident about now that we've had this, not just a win against Utep, but an offense that looked much better doing it. All right, so let's talk about the defense. I'm trying to spend most of my time today talking about the offense. I'm not going to spend as much time talking about the defense. I was a little haphazard in my note-taking, and ESPN, it was already 1 a.m. when I went to make this video, and ESPN had not yet updated the defender stats. They had the stats for everybody else, but the defensive stats as far as the tackles and everything were still missing. I think the statisticians just went to sleep. So I don't have the tackling numbers or who forced and recovered which fumbles, which kind of decreases my ability to analyze them quite as well. But I wrote down a lot of stuff during the game. I'm going to use those stats from that to talk about these players here, but I'm going to kind of hit the big key points on the defense, move on to special teams, and then my 3 keys to the game. All right, so the first thing on defense, first thing that jumps out is that they allowed 232 yards passing and a touchdown against a Conference USA team with a quarterback who he's pretty good. He's a quarterback who's been able, against Mexico State and Bethune Cookman, he was able to throw some really deep passes. He didn't complete a lot of deep balls against Boise State, and that was good to see. But they still allowed 232 yards passing. They're going to really need to tighten it up. They allowed a lot of yards passing, over 200 yards passing against UCF. They got another good quarterback coming against them with the Oklahoma State offense next week. So they're going to really need to tighten that up. That was a real issue here. Boise State, their Boise State defense, they kind of played a little bit of a bend or don't break, but I don't think it was ever even that. I think it was kind of a bend until a big play comes kind of thing. They never looked dominant on the defensive side, at least in the first half, really not until pushing into the second half there. They didn't ever look dominant in the defensive side, but they got some good breaks and they played with aggressiveness and intensity. This was a defense, like I said, that only had 3 interceptions last season and no forced fumbles. I knew when Andy Avalos came in that he was going to turn that around. I knew when he came in here with a type of player, if you go back and you watch the Boise State stats from those early 2000 periods and you watch Avalos play, man, is it exciting to watch him tackle. He hits guys so hard. I'm sure when he walks around the locker room and he's saying, people are perking up their ears because they don't want coach to come blindside him. He was an incredibly hard-nosed tackler when he was Boise State, and I knew that he was going to bring intensity to this defense. Even last week when Boise State gave up a lot of points to UCF, they still had 2 interceptions, which were, like I said, 3 interceptions last season. They had 2 in the last game. So I knew that the big play opportunities were going to turn around, and that's what this is. This is a big play defense. They had 6 turnovers in this game, 3 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, multiple tackles for loss, multiple sacks. They're a big play defense, but they're not a consistent defense, and that's okay. That means that you're in a rebuilding year. You're still getting your players underneath you that you want to establish going forward. You're still establishing your schemes. You're getting your players and your coaches on the same page. Like I said last season, I thought this was a Boise State defense that had a lot of talent at different positions, a lot of star players, especially when you had Avery and Walker, but you had a lot of star players, but really no consistency. You really had no team chemistry going on the defensive end. And that chemistry will improve going forward, but the thing you can improve right off the bat, even without bringing in new players, even without developing new schemes, is the intensity and the big play opportunities. And that's what we saw. Boise State went out today. They allowed a lot of running yards, especially in those first couple drives for Utep. Utep only had 104 yards rushing overall, but Boise State was on their heels early in the first half there. Luckily, we were able to stop them in the goal line, force a field goal, and then force another field goal. So they were able to stop him early there, but UTEP was running pretty, and UTEP has good running backs. We talked about that in my preview video. They have two running backs that have gone for over 100 yards. So they have good running backs on this team, but it's also a Conference USA team. It's also Conference USA level offensive linemen. Even though you've got two good running backs, the defense was not getting home. And that's what we saw early on in this Boise State team. In this Boise State defense, they were playing a coverage defense, especially on third downs. And they gave up 3 third downs in a row. In the first half, even though eventually I think UTEP finished up 5 for 13, in the first half they were 4 of 9 on third down conversions, and 3 of those came on one drive. Before Boise State was able to tighten up and I think forced a field goal in that one. Yeah, they did force a field goal in that one. So Boise State, they allowed 3 straight third down conversions because they were coming in tight. They were playing great first and second. They were sending blitzers. If you remember my review video, I talked about how Boise State was not getting any push up front on the defensive line. They were not winning their battles up front. They were not putting pressure on the quarterback. They were not getting running backs in the backfield. They were not able to win their battles on the line. And I said what Boise State needs to do every single time, because I thought the secondary last game played pretty well. But what I said is it doesn't matter how well the secondary is playing. If the quarterback has a little time to throw, he's going to find somebody. And if your guys aren't winning the battles on the front, on the line of scrimmage, then the running backs are going to have a field day. So I said last week that Boise State needs to send a blitzer on every single pass, every single play, running or passing. 1st and 10 or 3rd and 13, Boise State needs to be sending a blitzer on every single play, because otherwise the quarterback's going to have all time to throw and he's going to find somebody. And that's what we saw. We saw that in the first, at least the first quarter, was Boise State playing pretty intensive on the first and second, coming up trying to stop the run. Besides that first drive, but then on the third downs, they were backing up. They were sending 4 or 5 on the line, but then backing up, putting a linebacker back in coverage, 2 safety kind of look or something like that. But they were going back and they were doing a coverage defense, and UTEP was finding the holes every single time. And Boise State, I realized it. This coaching staff doesn't need me. They don't need anyone telling them what to do, because they're smart. They know what they need to do. And they figured it out. And from the second quarter onward, they sent a blitzer on every single down. It was beautiful to see. We started seeing tackles for loss. We started seeing huge hits. We started seeing interceptions. We started seeing forced fumbles. Boise State fed off of that. When you have a defense going out and making huge plays, when you have an offense, an opponent's offense that's struggling and not being able to go out and score or being able to make a big play every single time, you build confidence in that. You feed up. That's where team chemistry comes from, is that ability to know that the guy standing to your left and your right and behind and in front, wherever they are, they have your back, and that you don't have to worry about what they're doing. You can focus on your job, on your position, and locking down whatever you've been assigned to do and just going out and doing it. That's where team chemistry comes from, is being able to work together, knowing that the other players have got your back. And that's what a all out, go out and get the guy, meet at the quarterback kind of defense engenders. And yes, it's a high risk, high reward. UTEP was able to hit a guy for a 48-yard touchdown. and the corners should have been tighter on that receiver. But you know what? If Boise State had been playing coverage on that play, they probably would have made a first down anyway. And if they hadn't been sending blitzes on every drive and been playing coverage, UTEP would probably have scored on that drive anyway. It would have taken them longer, but they'd have scored on that drive anyway. Boise State would have had the opportunities like they did the rest of the time for so many big plays, getting into the backfield or for the interception. So it's high risk, high reward. You don't want to live on it forever. I'm not saying Boise State for the next 10 years should be a blitz them every time defense, but when you have a defense that's still struggling to find itself, when you have a defense that doesn't have the necessary depth through all of its positions, and even necessarily the top skill players at each defensive position, you got to overcome it with play calling. And one of the ways you do that is through being more aggressive and hoping that it pays off. And Boise State was able to do that today. I was very impressed by the defensive effort. I wasn't necessarily impressed by the defense overall as far as consistently throughout the whole game, but I was very impressed by the effort. It was an outstanding performance by the defense here. Great key players that I'm going to call out on this are Oladipo, true freshman, first game. He didn't play versus UCF. And his first, or if he played, he didn't have any tackles. So ESPN didn't record him for any tackles. But he had 2 interceptions in this one. He almost ran one back for a touchdown. Showed a little bit of his freshman brain there because he intercepted it in the end zone. I think he had LaBeouf's pick 6 ringing in his mind. He thought, this is my chance. He's weaving his way. He's running it down. And then he gets surrounded by the defenders. And instead of either tucking it in and just kind of, go pushing forward what you can, he starts kind of hopping around trying to see where he can go, and the ball got knocked out. Very lucky for him that the offensive lineman for UTEP who recovered it was already out of bounds by the time he touched the ball. But he needs to show a little bit more of, enough is enough, kind of what we told Hank Bachmeier last week. Enough is enough. You need to know when you need to get down. But other than that, he played great. He showed great aggressiveness. I expect to see him as a key part of this defense moving forward. Jale Skinner, as always, incredible player. I know he had at least one forced fumble. He had a couple of tackles for a loss. I wish I had the ESPN defensive stats there. But I think you should definitely go look them up after this video because I was excited to see how many tackles the Boise State players had. It was a really great game. And then Tyrek Jones also had an interception, but not just the pick. He was all over the field. He was making tackles for a loss. I believe he had a sack, but again, I don't have the stats for that. I just remember one of the secondary players coming in. But Tyrek Jones impressed me today with his go out and hit the guy on the nose. Well, not on the nose. That's how you get a targeting. But go out and hit the guy as hard as you can. And it was an awesome. Just aggressiveness. If you could have a key word for this defense besides big play defense, it would be aggressiveness. I was impressed. Against UCF, Boise State didn't look like this. They looked on their heels. They looked tentative. They looked unsure of themselves. This Boise State defense, they didn't necessarily know they were doing the right thing every play, but boy, did they go out and do whatever it was they were doing with 100% intensity. And that's what we talk about. You talk about going out. If you're going to make a mistake, at least fail 100%. Because at the end of the day, you're going to have failed anyway. So you might as well be able to go out and say that at least you tried your hardest. And Boise State, they didn't fail. They were able to come up with some great turnovers on this one and win the game. But they were going out there and every play giving it their 110%. And that's what I think they're going to build on that. That momentum is going to carry them in to next week versus Oklahoma State. So I've kind of mixed in my negatives with my positives on this one. But I do have one big negative to talk about here. One big negative to talk about on this, and that is the fact that when Boise State, it's kind of like I talked about with offense, keeping your starters in late. When Boise State was up big in the third quarter, I'm not saying that you should rotate your entire second string into the defense. I'm not saying that. You got to be able to keep UTEP down. Teams can come back all the time, and you want to have a big win that you can maybe use to later in the season be able to look back on and use that as a resume builder. You want that, but you've got to take out some key players, especially in positions that are taking lots of hits, that are delivering lots of hits, that are in vulnerable slots. And I'm talking specifically, if you have a key player, like if you had DeMarcus Lawrence on this team, you wouldn't want him still going out and trying to work his way around the tackle and getting sacks or trying to hit the big running back late in the third quarter. And the DeMarcus Lawrence level player on this team, who not that he's necessarily at that level. I've talked about how he's not necessarily been the dominant presence that Boise State expected out of him, but that star player who's taking lots of hits, who's always got who's always got hit an eye for the ball and is always going out and getting it, is Riley Wimpy. And he was still in the game in the third quarter in a situation when Boise State had a huge lead, in a position that he shouldn't have been in. And he went out and he got a targeting call on him. Now, there was a lot of questionable calls. I didn't talk about that at the beginning. I meant to. But, this was a Conference USA crew, and you could tell it. They called at least 2 roughing the passer calls that were completely bogus. There is no way that any ref with 20/20 vision should have been calling those plays. And they also had there was a pass interference. There was a pass interference that they called on a Boise State player when the ball was 10 feet out of bounds, uncatchable, and they still called it. So I'm going to say that up front. The refs on this one, they were doing their best to get Utep the win. They just, I guess Utep either didn't pay them enough. Just kidding. But, they didn't quite get there for Utep. But there were some questionable calls. The targeting call is one of them. But Riley Wimpy got a targeting call on him, and he's going to be out for the first half against Oklahoma State. That is huge. This is one of the lead tacklers on the team. He wasn't lead tackler last week. That was Jalen Skinner. But he's one of the lead tacklers on this team, and that is going to make a huge impact. Someone on this Boise State defense is going to have to step up and be that player for Boise State. Now, it's a huge impact. We'll talk about it more when I get to the preview, but I do want to say up front that Boise State fans should not be as concerned about his loss as they would about their key player in past years. Riley Wimpy is good, and he's a good player, but he's not a Leighton Vander Esch level player. He's not a DeMarcus Lawrence layer. He's not a Wheeler layer level player. He maybe he's on the same level ish of a Tanner Vallejo type, but this is a defense that isn't built around one key player. It really isn't. Riley Wimpy is good, but he still wasn't really able to stop. He wasn't able to stop UCF's running backs. He wasn't able to stop Bowser last week against UCF. He wasn't able. He didn't get a single sack on Dylan Gabriel's. So, he's good, but this team isn't built around his success or failure. This team is really built around the defensive play calling, because there's not really necessarily a single player on this team that can go and play, regardless of his game, is going to impact the entire defensive unit. Now, past Boise State teams have had that kind of one guy that if he was out, it was a whole different scheme. But whether Riley Wimpy is out there or not, it doesn't really necessarily impact the way that this defense runs. Boise State's definitely going to feel his loss there because he's a great player. He is good. I'm not trying to say he's not good. I'm not trying to say he's not important. But this defense doesn't hinge on his performance, is the point I'm trying to get across. So I think it's going to impact how Boise State plays a little bit. It's going to make them more vulnerable. And in a game where Boise State already needs as many breaks to go this way, this is one break going against them out the bat. So yes, it's a big impact. And it really sucks. And I don't put this on him. I put this on the defensive coaches, keeping him specifically, a couple of other key starters out in the game late in the third when they should have been sitting on the sideline, resting up, getting fresh, enjoying watching a football game where their backups come in and make some big plays as they wait for the next big week's matchup against Oklahoma State. So it's big. It's a major goof up by the defense here, probably the biggest mistake out of everything. But I do think that this defense is still going to be able to go out there and have a similar performance than they would have whether he was out there or not, because they'll just have to make up for it with more aggressive play calling. And honestly, that might do the defense good, because the more aggressive they can be in their play calling, the more blitzes that they can send out there, the more pressure they can put on Oklahoma State quarterback. He's going to find guys in the secondary, but maybe Riley Wimpy's he's going to find guys in the secondary. Regardless of what Boise State does, but they give him time, he's going to find guys deep. So maybe Riley Wimpy's absence will motivate this defensive coaching staff to be as aggressive as they were later in the game up front. Maybe it will just say, okay, you know what? let's all holds barred. Let's just go at it right off the bat, and maybe that'll be a good thing. And you know what? Riley Wimpy is going to be in there for the second half. There's nothing like having a fresh, because defensive players don't have to warm up as much. Being out of the game doesn't impact them as much as it does an offensive player who kind of gets out of rhythm. There's nothing like having one of your top players on defense completely fresh against an offense that's already a little tired and beat down, and maybe has taken a couple of big play or been hit by a couple of big plays by Boise State. Let's hope so. But there's nothing like putting in a fresh guy on defense. When that fresh guy is your number one tackler over the last season, at least last 2 years, I believe. If that guy's your number one tackler, that is a huge difference. Last year, but that is a huge difference for a defense. So I think that this is going to. It's not going to be a good thing. I'm not saying that, but I think that this is going to have some interesting impacts. I think it will affect how Boise State's play calling is defensively the first half and maybe make them better. And it's definitely going to give Boise State a boost or an edge in the second half when he is able to get back out there. If it was up to me, I'd want him in there for both halves. We really, really need him. But I don't think it's going to necessarily have the apocalyptic impact that a lot of people already have spinning in their brain. So I just want to cut that off now. So defense overall, giving them a B+. The turnovers get them the B. If it was just turnovers alone, it'd be an A+. But there was a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of open passes. They didn't get to the quarterback as many times as they should have, especially in the first half. So we'll talk about that here a little bit when I talk about my 3 keys of the game. But so B+ effort overall, but much, much improved over UCF last week. Good to go. I thought I'd forgotten something, but we're good. We're good. Moving on. All right, so special teams. Special teams, A+ performance. Outstanding job by them. Dalmas, 4 as always. This kid is amazing. He can hit it from wherever on the field. If we ever need a kick, he's going to get it for us. We might need one next week. We probably are. If we're going to win that game against Oklahoma State, there's going to be a couple times where we're not going to necessarily get it into the end zone. And so we're going to need his kicking leg out there, and he's going to do a great job. 2 punts, which were both fine. There was no really issues on them. They weren't necessarily there were 6 punts last week, so it's great that Boise State only had to punt twice this week, and neither of them were punts that Vasquez was kind of having to leg it up and kick it as far as he could, and they were actually able to down one of those punts at the 3. The same guy, the same tight end, Hopper, who was able to make that touchdown catch only on his first touchdown catch of his career, also was able to catch the punt at the 3-yard line. Outstanding job by him. Cobbs had an 81-yard touchdown punt return. He looked amazing. He looked electric. I'm not going to go as far as to say that he looked Jeremy Avery level because he really kind of won it on the speed end versus the shiftiness, and overall it was an outstanding job blocking. Not to take anything away from Cobbs, but the return unit did an amazing job blocking for him on that. No fouls called against them. A really great job. So that was exciting to see. C.T. Thomas, like I said, he struggled in this one, especially catching the ball. But hey, he made up for it as a returner, especially after Cobbs hurt his ankle. And he had a 47-yard kick return that really kind of electrified the defense the second half there. He played well. Sorry, the offense the second half. He played well. And the return coverage, out of 4 returns by Utep here, they only allowed an average of 18.3 yards per return. One good return in the second half, but other than that, they stopped them at one point. They stopped it after an 11-yard return. Really played well overall. And like I said, great special teams coverage on the punting game. So A+ effort overall. Top player for special teams is going to be Cobbs with that 81-yard return. Well, before we move on to the 3 keys of the game, there is something I forgot to mention. And since we're talking about special teams, it kind of ties in. For the offense, Boise State had 13 drives. They scored on 9 out of 13 of those drives. Okay performance, but they need a better average, especially against a team like Oklahoma State. 2 of those drives that they didn't score on were punts. That's okay. You're getting the ball away. You're flipping field. That's part of the game. It's all right. But there were 2 issues there that they should have scored on, or at least been able to get down, maybe get a field goal that they didn't. One of them was a fumble. That was the one from from Octavius Evans. We already talked about that. The other one was a turnover on downs, and we've already talked about that. So those are 2 big issues. Boise State scoring on 9 of 13. Additionally, they only scored on 5 out of the 13 drives. Only 5 of them were touchdowns. They had 4 drives and in field goals. again, that's a bit of a consistency issue. So while I gave this offense an A minus overall, and I was excited by their performance and their improvement, they definitely need to get better inside of the red zone. I think that if they could just, if they could move in and use a player situationally like a Sears. I talked about it in my season preview. I would love to see Jack Sears out there in the red zone. He's got better legs than Bachmeier. He's an incredibly accurate quarterback. He's amazingly accurate, even though we didn't get to see him throw the ball except for one time. It was dropped today. He's an amazingly accurate quarterback. I think he could perform well in the red zone and really help Boise State, even though they had a good performance last week against UCF. This week was really a step backwards there. And if that continues, I think this coaching staff needs to start shifting Jack Sears in those kind of situational downs where they need, they're within the 20. There's not a lot of space for Bachmeier to throw the ball, and they need a quarterback who's going to be able to use his legs as well. Jack Sears, much more pro style, is going to be able to help Boise State in that area. Okay, last but not least, 3 keys to the game. We're going to hit these real quick here and wrap up. We're already at 48 minutes. So the first one, put pressure on the quarterback, giving that a B overall. It was good, but not great, especially in the first half. There was really no pressure on the quarterback, but Boise State was able to get some good sacks there after only getting 3 last week. But there were still several times where Boise State dropped back into the coverage and the quarterback was wide. He could have ran with it if he wanted to, but he had plenty of time, was able to get the ball off. There were also a couple times where Boise State sent the blitz and didn't get there. That's a big no-no. If you're going to send the blitz, if you're going to be aggressive, you have to be able to at least put pressure. And when I say didn't get there, I mean that their guys running for the blitz were knocked down, and the quarterback still had as much time as if he was going in coverage. I'm not saying every blitz you have to go touch the quarterback, but you have to put visible pressure on him. And there were a couple times there where Boise State sent the blitz and there was no pressure on the quarterback. So that's an issue. But overall, pretty better improvement overall, and definitely in the second half, a good performance getting the quarterback. So B overall and put pressure on the quarterback. Try to establish the run game. I'm giving this a B minus. Now you're gonna ask, why is this a B minus? It should be like a D. But with only 50 running yards in the first 3 quarters, but 121 yards overall, so they were able to establish it in the fourth quarter. And like I said, it wasn't necessarily that they established the running game as a part of this offense that they can just go to and grind it out, but they established a form of running game. They established a running game that's going to be helpful going forward, especially if they can get Holani more touches. He looked good every time he touched it. I don't believe he had a negative play. So he looked good every time he touched it. If he can get more, I think Boise State can get back into having a running back that goes for over 60 yards at least, maybe. But they had a running game that with those 50 yards were in 50 important yards, and they helped the offense and they helped set up the passing game. So they established a form of running game, even if it wasn't the form that most Broncos are used to. So B minus overall in that one, but a B minus trending in the right direction. All right, last here, get long ball going. Solid A in this one. It'd be an A plus if Bachmeier had been a little bit more consistent. But the second play out the gate, Boise State threw the ball deep, even though that was incomplete. And the third pass out the gate, they threw it deep to Shakir, who had the one-handed catch. So Boise State, I think they looked at their game tape. They saw a key part that was missing. They wanted to go out there and throw the ball, and they did it. As outstanding job by them. Bachmeier, again, pushing the ball deep, but lacked accuracy. That's the only thing that Boise State really needs to tighten up here to really make this a very dangerous element of their offense. But 6 completions over 20 yards and 1 completion for 61 yards, even though a good portion of that was on the ground, still counts as a long pass. Excited to see Boise State pushing down the field, and that's going to be huge if they want to beat Oklahoma State. They need to be able to open up and push those defenders downfield to open up some availability, not necessarily for the running game, but for the short passing game for sure. All right, so that's my video overall. That's talked about offense, defense, and special teams. A much better, happier ending for Boise State fans. I hate having to review losses, so getting to review a great win, not just a win, but a dominant win as far as the scoreboard goes. And there were definitely a lot of dominant moments, even if it wasn't necessarily a consistent dominant performance. There were a lot of good moments from this team. I think we're going to see a lot of There was improvement already, and this coaching staff is improving that they can improve and are intent on doing so. So I think that the issues we saw in this game, they're not going to be fixed necessarily by the Oklahoma State game, but they're going to be better. And I think that Boise State's going to be very competitive in that game. So I'm excited for my Oklahoma State preview. Make sure that you like and subscribe if you aren't already. And if you're a Bronco fan, you're not a member of Bronco Nation Updates on Facebook, make sure you go out and become a member. We have almost 9,000 members now on our excellent Facebook page. So thank you for watching this video. Look for my 3 keys to the game video. Also look for my college football week I do a couple other non-Boise State videos. I do a college football weekly review where I talk about all the big things that happen in college football. It's a very exciting video for me. I enjoy doing it. And then I also do a college football top games of the week preview, talking about the top matchups. I give my predictions. So far, I'm 7 out of 10 predicting matchups and 8 of 10 against the over-under. Better than ESPN so far, I'd like to note. But make sure you like and subscribe. Got lots of great content. It's going to be a great season. Let's look forward to that matchup against Oklahoma State next week. And as always, go Big Blue.